If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. Hey guys, welcome to California Haunts Radio. It's a great Monday. It's kind of cold outside and windy and getting icky because it's supposed to rain, but I welcome all of you. Tonight we've got a great show. My name is Charlotte. I am your host, and we are the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team at www. Oh, hang on, this is our guest. Hello, Doctor.
Yes, good evening. Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Okay. Is this the right time?
Yes, sir. We're on the air right now.
Okay. Whom am I speaking to?
My name is Charlotte. I'm the host.
And where are you located?
Sacramento, California, sir.
Okay. And your listening audience is out there in that region?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to the show. I've been really eager to talk with you. I used to be a crime beat reporter, and I did get the opportunity to visit the coroner's office, 2 or 3 times as a reporter, and it always fascinated me. And when I heard you on the other guy's show, I was just, excuse the pun, dying to get you on.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for inviting me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Are we on live, or what is this, recorded?
We are on live right now.
We are live?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry, what was your question?
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a forensic pathologist and a medical legal consultant. I have my MD and JD degrees. I'm a doctor and a lawyer. And I am a board-certified anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathologist. I have been practicing now since 1962. I finished my 5 years of training in pathology, and I was able in that same 5-year period to fit in 3 years of law school and 2 years of military service. I served as a captain in the United States Air Force at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. So since 1962 to the present time, I've been working out of Pittsburg, but my cases are from all over the country and cases from around the world. I do about 600 autopsies a year. The last few years I have had an associate come on board, so we split that. And I do more than 100 medical legal consultations for attorneys, plaintiff and defense in civil cases, and then prosecution and defense in criminal cases. I am the forensic pathologist for coroners and district attorneys in 4 counties surrounding Allegheny County, Pittsburgh. I served as coroner for Allegheny County for 20 years, 2 separate 10-year periods, 70 to 80 and 96 to 2006. I have done about 21,000 autopsies, and I have reviewed, supervised about 41,000 others. I have testified at least a couple dozen states and a couple dozen federal courts, and I've testified in half a dozen foreign countries. I lecture and teach. I have about 650 publications. I am the co-author of 8 books that deal with the cases that I have been involved in, from JFK on through. We can talk about those as you wish. And then I am the author, co-author, editor, co-editor of about 48 professional books, including multi-volume sets. One 5-volume set, Forensic Science, has been published since 1982 with semi-annual supplements. So, that's kind of a brief summary, give you an idea of my background.
How does someone get interested in forensic pathology?
Well, the way it happened with me was that I just was going to be a doctor because my father told me that from the time I was a baby. I never thought about it otherwise. An only child. My parents were immigrants, and they worked hard in a mom and pop grocery store. And my father's idea for me was always to be a doctor. So I went to University of Pittsburg, pre-med, and I don't know what happened. I began to think a little bit about maybe law school. I was very active on campus, involved with all kinds of organizations. And in any event, I applied to medical school and went to medical school. And then about my third year of medical school, I began to think more seriously about combining law and medicine. And I finally met with someone who was an authority at that time, and he gave me a good idea of the kind of work that could be involved. I made the decision then that I would apply to law school. I finished my internship, which was 1 year of hospital work that one had to do in those years after graduation from medical school. And then I decided, after thinking about it and doing some research and talking to people, that the most interesting, challenging, and meaningful area of professional involvement at the interface of law and medicine was forensic pathology. You think about what the forensic pathologist deals with, that becomes immediately evident. And so I applied for a residency in pathology, and I applied to law school at the same time. I got permission to go to law school while I was doing my residency, as long as I kept up with my work. So I did 2 years at the University of Pittsburg, School of Law. While I was doing 2 years of residency, then the Air Force grabbed me for 2 years. I was fortunate to be stationed at a big base, and I got credit for 2 years of pathology training there. And then when I came out, I needed my third year of law school, and I needed a year of forensic pathology. So I looked around. Baltimore was the place. University of Maryland School of Law had a good evening vision and a top medical examiner's office. And that's what I did for that final year, and then returned to Pittsburgh. But how does one get involved in forensic pathology or think about it? Everybody probably has a different reason. There's always been a need for more forensic pathologists. Forensic pathologists have a much more demanding, rigorous, and challenging professional life than do hospital pathologists. I'm not denigrating hospital pathology. I was hospital pathologist for many years, a couple of decades. I was chairman of the Department of Pathology at one hospital, and so on. I enjoyed it very much. But there's not the controversy in dealing with lawyers and law enforcement officers and so on. It's a totally different picture. So you've got to be interested in dealing with those kinds of cases. And the criminal side, murder, rape, sexual assault, drug abuse, alcohol, infant, child, parental, elderly abuse. And on the civil side, medical malpractice, product liability, wrongful death, and so on. You've got to be interested in that. You don't have to have a law degree. I think that my legal education, however, gave me a much better picture of what is involved and much more, how shall I say, potential, not automatic, but a potential ability to deal with the kinds of things that forensic pathologists must contend with when they are functioning with attorneys, criminal, civil, and law enforcement, judges, and public health officials, and families, and so on. So how you get interested in it is that you decide that you want to do that kind of work, but it requires additional training and usually doesn't pay as well as full-time hospital pathologist does. So that's why there is never an excessive number of forensic pathologists around.
That's what I want to ask you, because you talk about hospital pathologist. What is the difference between what you do and, say, a county coroner?
Well, the difference is not what I do in a coroner. It is that kind of work. Coroners, in this country, we have coroner systems in roughly half of the jurisdictions, people who are elected, and in only 2 states, Louisiana and Ohio, is it required that they be an MD. Anybody else can be elected as a coroner. Medical examiners comprise the other half of the people who run medical legal investigative offices. But it doesn't automatically mean that the ME office is going to be better than the coroner's office. It all comes down to whether the individual occupying either position is aware, cognizant of what is required of that office, and understands what is needed. I do work for 4 coroners. They're elected. Only one is an MD, and he's not a pathologist. But these are solid guys, and they understand what's necessary. I'm not saying it because they have me, but they know that they need a forensic pathologist to do the autopsies. So, there's no. What I do now is kind of work that I did, and people who worked for me when I was coroner. I had 4 full-time forensic pathologists working under me when I was Allegheny County coroner. So coroners and medical examiners, forensic pathologists, as they say, they function and deal with the same kinds of cases, but it depends then on whether you're talking about an elected coroner who has to reach out for a forensic pathologist to do the work, and should. And more is coming to the point that coroners recognize that they need that kind of professional input. Then medical examiners, by definition, they're going to be forensic pathologists, and they need other colleagues to work with them. Many, depending on the size of the city, you have in California a mixture of coroner's offices and medical examiner's offices. You have medical examiner offices in the major cities, and coroners still in the most of the other counties. I don't know what the count is at this time, but I know that there is a combination of coroners and medical examiners in California, and that's true in New York State and in other states too. Many states have a statewide medical examiner system. Some states have only coroners, and other states have a combination, like Pennsylvania. Several counties, Allegheny County, Pittsburg, and Philadelphia, have an appointed medical examiner system, and 3 or 4 other counties, and then the rest of the 67 counties have an elected coroner system. So it's not a matter, as I said, and I want to repeat that, of whether you are an elected coroner or an appointed medical examiner. It's a matter of how do you run the office, how do you understand and appreciate what needs to be done, and do you follow through in an appropriate, objective fashion.
I was wondering that because the county that I worked in as a reporter, they would call him a forensic pathologist. That's why I was curious about it. I'm glad you cleared that up for me. Thank you.
Yes.
You've also done consultation for TV shows, correct?
Yes, I've done all kinds of TV shows over the years. I have one coming up, by the way, this Friday. Look for it on Court TV. They interviewed me about the George Floyd case, the African-American man who died following that altercation with police officer Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, Hennepin County. The trial, in fact, starts, I think, this week. And then even Court TV will have a program, I've been told, on Friday afternoon, I think about 2 o'clock Eastern time, which then is a different time out there where you are. And you'll see me being interviewed. I've done countless TV shows, some very, very extensive, John F. Kennedy and many other famous cases. And then others are, more brief interviews. People will often call me to comment. many times somebody, television station, will send me an autopsy report, ask me to look over to give my thoughts about the case. I did that just today. A case from, I think, Massachusetts, where a 4-month-old baby died 4 years ago, and they still haven't ruled on the manner of death. There were some brain hemorrhages and so on, and they still haven't ruled on the manner of death. So the reporter up there called me to get my comment on whether it's, what is the reason, what is the basis, what is the rationale for something being delayed 4 years, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I've been on all kinds of TV shows.
Well, let's look at some of these cases. We talk about John. Hey, before we do that, let me ask you this. So, based on, say, somebody else's report, you can go over that and tell, how the person died or the steps leading up to that death?
Well, I obviously am not going to be the person who's going to do the autopsies on these kinds of cases, because the deaths are handled by the medical examiner coroner's office. It's not up to the family or anybody else to reach out and say they want it done by somebody else. Mm-hmm. I just got a call a couple of days ago and a follow-up today about a police-related death down in New Orleans, and they wanted me to come down to do the autopsy, second autopsy, and I told them I'm sorry, but I couldn't do it, and they wanted to send the body to me. Fine, I did an autopsy just today on a police on a jail death from Ohio. The family was not happy about what was reported by the coroner's office that did the autopsy, and they had the body brought to me for a second autopsy. Your question about can I look at a report? Well, yes, I of course I have to look at the autopsy report, and I want to see all the relevant available materials, scene and photos, investigations, autopsy report, toxicology report, study microscopic slides, autopsy photos, background history, and so on. And then I arrive at my opinions. I try to be very objective and honest, and not be influenced because I've been consulted. Sometimes I come up with findings that are not acceptable, that are not helpful for the attorneys consulting me, but I can't twist facts. I got to maintain my credibility, mm-hmm. and I try very hard to do that. But in the majority of cases, the consultations are almost all cases in which I have not done an autopsy. The cases where I have done the autopsies for the 4 counties here in southwestern Pennsylvania, that's a different matter. I do those, and I'm always testifying that for the district attorney in those counties, because I have determined that it was a homicide or whatever. And when I'm consulted by attorneys elsewhere, then it's usually going to be in criminal cases for the defense, because the prosecution attorney is going to have the local medical examiner. Let me give you an example. In California, I testified last year in a case in San Diego, Rebecca Zahal. Do you know about the Zahal case? Mm-hmm. A 33-year-old, beautiful Eurasian woman who was found hanging outside the balcony of the master bedroom of the Spreckles mansion, yes, which was owned by her boyfriend, Shackney. And there she was with her hands bound behind her back and her calves tied tightly against each other, and a rope around the neck, and a T-shirt stuffed into her mouth, the sleeve, and bare ass naked. And the sheriff, the medical examiner, insisted that it was a suicide, and they would not change. Family finally got an attorney, and they couldn't do anything because the authorities would not move. They filed a civil action, a wrongful death action against her boyfriend's brother. He was a tugboat operator from Mississippi who had gone to California to be there. His nephew had been injured. And in any event, I testified, and the jury came back in a few hours with a $5.2 million verdict against against the man that the Zahal family felt, and the attorney for them felt had been responsible for Rebecca Zahal's death. So there's an example of, I come in and testify in opposition, as it turns out, to the local prosecutor. And there are many cases like that. I testified a year or so ago, first-degree murder case in Iowa, where a man was charged first-degree murder of killing his mother. I testified, and he was acquitted. I testified in the case with a border guard official down in Arizona, charged with murder for shooting a teenage Mexican boy who was trying to climb over the wall with trucks and so on. And they brought homicide charges against him in America, the guard, and I testified for that guard, and he was acquitted. So those are examples of some cases where I have testified. It doesn't mean that I'm always right and they're always wrong. And I want to, in fact, emphasize that point, that there are differences of opinion. Pathology, while the most tangible and, how shall we say, scientifically concrete of all medical sciences and all medical specialties, still is not an absolute science. Only mathematics and physics and chemistry and astronomy are absolute sciences. Pathology is not an absolute science. You can have different opinions about things, and it's not that my opinions in those cases were 100% right, perfect, unassailable, and that the opinions of the people on the other side were stupid and absolutely invalid. It just means that there are differences of opinion, differences of interpretation, and I set forth my interpretations in the opinions I submit in written form to the attorneys who consult me, then many times in depositions before trial, and then in trial testimony. So it's not that I'm some super person and that I'm something special. I do think that I have expertise and ability after all of these years of experience, and I think that I am able to articulate my views in a way that the juries find to be credible. And, so I don't have a horse in the race. I'm paid in advance and not working on a contingency fee basis. And I set forth my opinions. I'm proud of the fact that after all these years and all these cases, very controversial nature, that I've maintained my credibility and continue to receive consultations by attorneys, from all over the country. That would not be the case if I were a medical expert for hire, a medical whore, as they like to say sometimes. So that's the story.
Well, even from my crime reporter's background, when you look at that Spreckles case and the fact that that cloth was stuffed in her mouth, it looks really suspicious. It doesn't look like a suicide.
No, it sure did not look like a suicide. And what she had to have accomplished, walking across the floor with her calves bound, getting herself, only 5'2", getting herself up over a 4-foot high balustrade to get over and haul herself down. No, it was not, in my opinion, a suicide, but the local officials and the medical examiner insisted that it was. And so, fortunately, the family got a strong attorney, did a great job, and filed that wrongful death action.
There you go. All right, let's talk about John F. Kennedy, because that's one of your more famous ones.
Well, I've been involved with the JFK case now since 1965. I was invited to give a talk at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences at the February 1966 annual meeting. The plenary session was going to be devoted to the Warren Commission report, and the Academy consists of different sections: pathology, criminalistic, psychiatry, toxicology, anthropology, entomology, odontology, etc. So they asked me to represent the pathology section. I went to the library and started looking around the 26-volume set without an index. Finally found what I was looking for. I gave my talk in February 1966, and all hell broke loose after that. And I was contacted by all kinds of people in the news media, and then I was contacted by some of the early critic researchers of the Warren Commission report, Mark Lane, Sylvia Marr, and then I studied the Zapruder film at Life Magazine headquarters in 1966, and then I was the first non-government sponsored, non-government related forensic pathologist given access to study the autopsy materials at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., which I did in August of 1972. And that's when I pointed out that the president's brain had not been examined. It had been fixed in formalin and preserved for 2 weeks to harden, which was the proper thing to do. They go back and they're supposed to then serially dissect it and examine it like you would a hard-boiled egg, cutting it in sections. That was not done. And furthermore, the brain was missing. Not only had it not been examined, but it was unaccounted for. And it remains unaccounted for to this day. So that was in 72. Meantime, in 1969, I've been consulted by District Attorney Jim Garrison in New Orleans, the Clay Shaw case, and I testified under oath in a federal court in D.C. In Garrison's attempt to get me access to the autopsy materials. The judge ruled. The government said they would appeal till hell froze over, their words. In the meantime, the trial had to proceed. Everybody was lined up, so I did not testify. Then in 1975, I testified before the Rockefeller Commission for about 4 hours or more under oath. And then in 1978, as a member of the Forensic Pathology panel of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which was established in 1977 by the United States Congress, by political Democrats and Republicans, and they established different panels. And there were 9 forensic pathologists. I gave my report as a minority. My colleagues were very critical of the terrible job that was done in the autopsy, as I had been expressing for all those years. But despite their strong criticism of that terrible job that was done, bungled badly, as they said, they still came to the conclusion that the Warren Commission got it right somehow. And anyway, I testified now for the 3rd time under oath. I have a book that'll be out in about 2-3 months discussing my now at about almost 55 years of dealing with the JFK case. I think it's going to be titled A Forensic Pathologist Dissects the Warren Commission Report. So that book is now completed. We're putting it together finally with all the photos and everything, but it'll be about 2-3 months before it is published. So that's my long history. I've testified 3 times under oath. I've spoken about this case thousands of times, including several foreign countries that are very interested in this case. Australia, England, South Africa, and Israel, and different other countries. So that's my relationship to the JFK case.
So my question with this is, do you think, I mean, like you say that they botched it for some reason. Was it a case that maybe, because considering who it was that they brought in, that whoever was handling this thing, you know, there's obviously short notice to get people in there to do the autopsy, you know, because...
It's not a problem with short notice. First of all, it wasn't short notice because there was a lapse of time. The autopsy should have been done by the medical examiner there in Dallas, who was a competent, trained forensic pathologist, but they shoved him aside, literally and figuratively, took the body illegally out of Texas, and they had 7-8 hours then before the autopsy began that evening to call in the foremost forensic pathologists in the country. They did not do that. They called in 2 naval career pathologists at Bethesda Naval Center, where the autopsy was done, who had never done a single autopsy, gunshot wound autopsy in their entire careers. This is the President of the United States, multiple gunshot wounds. You got to determine entrance, exit, angle, sequence, trajectory, and you got to correlate all those wounds with the multiple gunshot wounds of John Conley, a formidable task that would require input from 2 or 3 forensic pathologists working closely together to call in 2 naval pathologists who had never done a gunshot wound autopsy in their entire careers was clearly evidence of the way in which this was going to be controlled. and their findings, the head injuries were vastly different from what were observed by a dozen or more doctors working on the president at Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas, vastly different as to where the injuries were and so on. So it was contrived, conspired from the beginning in terms of people who, of course, were responsible for the assassination. And then for various reasons that I can only conjecture upon, the government chose to cover it up, not to reveal to Americans that Kennedy had not been assassinated by Chinese or Cubans or Russians, but he had been assassinated by Americans. It was a homemade plot. It was the overthrow of the government by the execution, the murder of the president. It was coup d'etat in America. It was the overthrow of the government. That's what it was. And they made a decision that that was going to be too much for the government to handle. What was going on in our country at that time, Vietnam War, following the debacle of Bay of Pigs, a disaster in Cuba. Problems around the world, domestic problems with voting rights and civil rights, and they just did not want to get into it. And that remains a problem for us today.
Now, my question, they talk about the main shooter, but was there a second shooter?
Yes, there definitely were two shooters. One from the front, behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll, and one from the rear. No question. The only way you have a single shooter is when they came up with the cockamamie single bullet theory. One bullet producing 7 wounds in Kennedy and Conley, in and out Kennedy's back, out his throat, moving upwards 11.5 degrees, despite having been fired, according to them, from the 6th-floor window. The bullet coming down and moving leftward. Bullet comes out of his neck, turns in midair to the right about 18, 20 inches, slams into Conley behind the right armpit, proceeds downward, piercing the lung, destroying 4 inches of the right fifth rib, exiting below nipple level. And there's Conley holding the Stetson hat, clearly at shoulder level, waving to the crowd. The bullet comes down, moving downward, and hooks back up and around several inches and smashes into the right wrist, breaking the radius, one of the 2 long bones from the elbow to the wrist, exits from the front of the wrist and re-enters his left thigh, and not found or seen by anybody there during all the medical treatment he received, surgery and everything, but just fortuitously, inadvertently found by a maintenance man that afternoon trying to get to the men's room at the hospital, finding the corridor blocked by stretchers at the ER area, bent down to move the stretcher, and lo and behold, there was the bullet. This is the hero of the single bullet theory, the magic bullet theory, as Mark Lane and I and others labeled it a long time ago. That bullet producing 7 wounds in 2 men, breaking 2 bones in a big 6'4" big bone Texan like John Conley, and emerging near pristine. The only slight deformity is at the base of the bullet, a weight loss of only 1.5%. 1.5% weight loss from the original weight, despite having left pieces of itself seen on x-rays in 3 anatomic locations of JFK and Conley. That's the single bullet theory. If you don't have a single bullet theory, you automatically must have 2 shooters.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other things too. The acoustical evidence that has been studied by the top acoustics experts in the country, which is what led the House Select Committee back in '79 when they concluded their deliberations to say with a high degree of probability that there had been 2 shooters. And yet the government, despite this congressional action of a bipartisan, nonpartisan, bipolitical committee, the government never did a damn thing about it.
So my question too is that, we think of the entry holes from those bullets. Was there an entry hole that seemed to come from above, or was it all? Did they all come in from ground level?
The president was struck in the head twice. One from the rear and one from the front. Okay. No, nobody was on the ground.
Okay.
Nobody in the sewer or anything like that. One was elevated behind. Could have been the Texas School Book Depository building. Mm-hmm. Could have been one of the other large buildings, and the other one somewhat elevated as I said, behind a picket fence on a grassy knoll.
Okay.
So the shots, both shots, had a slightly downward trajectory. All three shots that hit the president, the two in the head simultaneously within less than a second time difference.
Okay. So, like you say, you think this was a cover-up. It sounds like a cover-up, as far as the government goes. To blame. But
That's right. They weren't going to deal with it then, and they don't want to deal with it now. That's right.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Yep. And it's just interesting, like you say, they didn't bring in a top forensic pathologist to do this. They did it with the Navy guys.
All of them were all well known to the government. All of them about 1 hour flying or driving time for the most part from D.C. And they had that 7-8 hour period when the president was being flown back. They had all the time in the world to put it together. And these were doctors, forensic pathologists, that the government was well aware of. I remember when I was in the Air Force, I met some of them when I went to conferences up in D.C. during that 2-year stint, and they were right there. They were completely ignored. Amazing.
That's just absolutely amazing. My next question is for Northern California and Central California, the Laci Peterson case.
Yes, I was consulted by attorney Mark Garagos. I went out there. I went to the scene, studied the scene with my colleague, Dr. Henry Lee. Then I did a second autopsy on Laci Peterson and the infant. I wound up not testifying. In fact, Dr. Lee, the renowned criminalist, and I were all set. He was in Pittsburg at my home, and we were going to fly out. And we studied it, and we studied the testimony of the pathologist who had done the autopsy. And we came to the conclusion that there was nothing we could do to help, that Mark Garagos had done a splendid job in cross-examining that doctor. And I don't know if people listening to you are aware, this is not to suggest that Scott Peterson did not kill. I think he is responsible, but the point is that where he killed her, when he killed her, and how he killed her were never proven. The body that was found did not have the arms, most of the legs were gone, the internal organs were gone, the head was gone, the infant was badly decomposed. He could not make determinations of a scientific nature. So we called Mark, and he understood. He's a great attorney, and he realized that he was better off just leaving the door closed. Again, I'm not challenging the jury's verdict in that case, but I'm saying that it was never established, never, how, when, where, what was the mechanism of her death. Very, very interesting case.
Let's talk about a couple things. When you go to work on a murder case, say somebody that's been strangled, what's a telltale sign for you guys to look at to see if somebody's been strangled, for sure somebody's been strangled or how they died?
Well, you look carefully at the neck area, and then you have to do a careful dissection of the inside of the neck. There are a bunch of muscles. They're called strap muscles because they look like little straps connecting one bone or cartilaginous structure to the other, up to the undersurface of the jaw, and so on. So you do a layer by layer dissection, looking for hemorrhages and so on. Strangulation is a difficult diagnosis to make. Sometimes, of course, if it's brutal, then you'll find markings and fractures. Other times it can be difficult. When it's a ligature strangulation, then you may not have any of these findings. This is the case. The Epstein case is a classic example. Dr. Michael Bodden, my friend and colleague, who did the second autopsy, he attended the autopsy that was done by the medical examiner's office. He disagreed with their findings. They signed it out as a suicide. Michael disagreed, and I disagreed. There were fractures of the hyoid bone. That's a U-shaped bone underneath the jaw with the base of the U facing outward. And then there were bilateral fractures of the thyroid cartilage, the Adam's apple. You do not get those fractures in a lean into suicide. Epstein was leaning into the ground, knees on the ground, and there wasn't enough force to produce those fractures. Force equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. There's no velocity. Just picture yourself leaning forward, and you got a rope around your neck, and you lean forward. Where's the force? You may die. Pressure continues on the arterioles, the arterial system, the carotid arteries going to the neck, and pressure on the vagus nerve, which comes from the brain, one on the right, one on the left, and controls heart and lung function. Yeah, I'm not saying you can't die, but you're not going to get those fractures. So in Epstein, we have those 3 fractures, and externally, there's very little to be seen in ligature strangulations. Manually, it's usually a different story. Manually, you'll many times find some abrasions, contusions, the finger impressions, and so on the neck, etc. But it's a tough diagnosis.
Mark, and that leads me to something else. I know when I was working, I ran into the people that were into the kinky types of suicides. The ones that would cut their ear off for a few seconds or whatever it was, and then they'd make the mistakes, and that was it. Kind of like what Robin Williams did, Well,
Robin Williams is a good example of what I'm talking about, a lean into suicide.
Okay.
He tied something around the doorknob and leaned into it and committed suicide. That's some people, when they commit suicide in jails, they have no way of suspending themselves, and they'll just take a garment or something and hook it around the bedpost and lean forward. You can definitely kill yourself. You can definitely hang yourself, absolutely. But you're not going to get the kinds of fractures that were found in Epstein from that kind of a lean into suicide. Jeffrey Epstein, in my opinion, was murdered. They didn't want to have him go to trial and talk about all the people who he had dealt with over the years. We'll see what comes out with when Ghislaine Maxwell goes to trial, supposedly in another month or so. She remained alive thus far. And if she remains alive and testifies, we'll see what she has to say about many of these prominent people in this country, and some very prominent people, including a prince from England. What she has to say will be fascinating.
Yes, absolutely. Moving on from strangulation. I know, guys, these are dark subjects, but this is what this gentleman does, and this is what I used to do when I was working. So, fascinating to me. Famous, people like you've done a consultation on Elvis. You've done did you do the consultation on Marilyn as well?
On whom?
Marilyn?
Yes, I did. Dr. Tom Noguchi is a medical examiner, is a good friend of mine in Los Angeles, and I was a consultant. Tom contacted me about Marilyn Monroe, and I reviewed everything. I did that with the Patty Hearst and Benin's Liberation Army people. I did that with the Charles Manson murders, Sharon Tate, LaBianca, because Dr. Noguchi was in charge, and he, as I said, was a good friend, and he contacted me, and I was a consultant in all of those cases, as I was in the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy that Dr. Noguchi handled too.
Interesting. So how did Marilyn Monroe die? Was it an overdose or a cover-up? Or
I think Marilyn Monroe died from an overdose. I don't think there's a question about the cause of death. The question has to do with the manner of death. Was it suicide? Was it accident? Was it homicide? And I'll tell you, it's a tough case. It was kind of left. They signed it out as probable suicide. Shows you that their uncertainty at that time. Dr. Curfey was the chief medical examiner at that time. Dr. Noguchi did the autopsy, but he wasn't the chief. So nobody really has challenged the cause of death. It was due to chlorohydrate, and which is a sedative, strong sedative, and some barbiturates. But did she do it accidentally? Did she do it with suicidal intent? Or was was he given the drugs in some fashion? That is what remains in question. The background is very interesting because of her relationship with Robert Kennedy and Jack Kennedy. Whether or not it was not convenient for her to continue to be around, as Jack Kennedy was planning to run for re-election in '64, and Bobby Kennedy planning to run for president in '68 before he was assassinated.
Interesting, very interesting. And you also consulted on Anna Nicole Smith's son, correct?
Yes, I went down and did a second autopsy on Daniel Smith there in the Caribbean, and I was going to do a second autopsy on Anna Nicole when she died in Florida, but they dilly-dallied around, the body began to decompose, and just came to be too late. But I did do a second autopsy. But no question he died from a drug overdose. The issue in that case was who gave him the drugs? When did he get the drugs? Did he bring them with him from California when he went to see his mother after she gave birth to that little baby girl, his half-sister? Or was he given the drugs by Howard Stern? That was the issue. And, I couldn't make that determination from the autopsy. Right. But he died from drugs.
Very interesting. Something else I wanted to go over with you, too, is I read Mr. Noguchi's book. He had that really great book about, being a coroner and everything. And I remember reading a passage in there about, and this is something people don't realize, is rigor mortis, and how it's not just people go stiff all at once. I think, is it twice that people have rigor?
No, rigor mortis, it takes a couple of hours before it begins to develop, and then it becomes fixed after about 8 to 12 hours. It remains fixed for about 24 more hours, and then it begins to break down. Instantaneous rigor is a very rare thing. Reported sometimes when people, like somebody shot violently or so on, but it's questionable whether it exists. But rigor mortis, body stiffening, is one of the things we look for to try to determine time of death.
Right.
Rigor mortis, the settling of blood, gravitational settling, and the dependent parts of the body, depending upon how the individual's position is when he or she dies. And then algor mortis, body temperature, which is the most scientific of the three, special thermometer inserted into the liver or up into the rectum, and you lose about a degree and a half per hour after you die. And anyway, you study those things. They're not precise. They vary. They're biological variables, and that's why it's important to get those criteria studied and examined as quickly as possible when a body is found. That did not happen, for example, with the murders in O.J. Simpson's with Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman. They failed to get in there to examine the bodies. Wasn't until many hours later, and by that time, the scientific imprecision of those criteria is so great that it was meaningless to try to determine when those people died. The same thing happened with Marilyn Monroe. They didn't get in there as quickly as they should have to make those determinations. They're very, very important, and they have to be done as quickly as possible when a body is found by a trained forensic pathologist to look for those things.
Was it true with Sharon? I've been reading a lot. Was it true with Sharon Tate that they actually were going to hang her, or did they hang her?
No, she wasn't hanged, as I recall. No, she was stabbed many times. I don't recall. I don't recall her being hanged.
Okay.
No, I don't recall that.
Because I had read somewhere that they had fashioned nooses to do it, and I wasn't sure if they had done it or not.
Well, maybe they were going to, but didn't work out.
Okay. Let's talk about Elvis real quick before we wrap up. How did you know how many drugs he had in his system at the time of death?
Yes, he had 11 central nervous system depressant drugs. They were all prescribed by Dr. Nicopoulos, the in-house was a sycophantic physician. Anything Elvis wanted, Dr. Nicopolis, good old Dr. Nick, would prescribe. He didn't mean any harm, obviously not. But if Elvis wanted the drug before, during, after a performance, drug to keep him up at night to play handball, go to the dentist at 4 o'clock in the morning so nobody would bother him, and so on. So Dr. Nick would prescribe medicine. Elvis Presley did not die from heart disease. He had minimal enlargement of the heart. He died from 11 drugs. And there's no question about it. The medical examiner who had said that he did not have jurisdiction of the body, Jerry Francisco by name, there in Tennessee, went to the hospital where the autopsy was being done by a private autopsy at Baptist Memorial Hospital, and quite improperly, unethically, and unscientifically said that before the autopsy was even finished, and obviously before toxicological analysis could have been conducted, he made the announcement that Elvis Presley had died from heart disease. That was a damn lie. And the autopsy pathologist, Dr. Muir by name, M-U-I-R, he stated that Elvis Presley did not die from heart disease. That's where the confusion exists because of the comment made by Dr. Francisco. But that's what killed Elvis Presley, all of those drugs.
Wow, that's a lot to have in your system. Is it because he couldn't sleep, or what was going on there?
Well, as I said, he would, take drugs for different things. He took drugs, so many of those things, many of them lead to constipation. Reportedly, he would spend 3-4 hours a day in the bathroom. Of course, the bathroom was lavishly furnished, nicer than most people's living rooms. But supposedly the diameter of the dilated bowel was the size of an average man's thigh, and that's how constipated he was. And he just took the drugs for those reasons. As I say, however he wanted to feel at a given time, and Dr. Nicopolis would just prescribe the drug. Antidepressant, anxiolytic, anti-anxiety, the tranquilizers, the sedatives, a real hodgepodge.
Oh, wow. That's a lot. Wow, you can't even imagine taking that much stuff. That's craziness. Just craziness. So as a forensic pathologist, what goal and message do you like to get out, or do you want to get out to people about what you do?
Well, I don't feel I'm on a mission. What I would like people to understand is, first of all, that medical legal autopsies are essential in cases of sudden violence, suspicious, unexpected, medically unattended deaths. You're going to determine the cause and manner of death. You got to do it in a scientific fashion. That's number one. Number two, autopsies have to be done by competent, trained people. Number three, you got to do ancillary tests, toxicology. Number four, you got to study background information and correlate everything carefully. Law enforcement investigations, photographs, and so on. So there's a message I'd like people to realize that, unlike fiction and television programs and so on, in real life it's not so simple and so easy, but it's a necessary, essential performance if there's going to be justice in both the civil and criminal systems.
Interesting. I was going to ask you about that. What you thought of the TV shows like Quincy or One West Waikiki?
Well, I'm not much of a TV fan. I had a little knowledge of them. I'm happy that they were shown to give people an idea of what goes on with forensic pathology, but people have to understand that it's fiction. It's not real life. And one thing that is very important is that the forensic pathologist is not like Quincy was, Jack Klugman, playing this forensic pathologist, a homicide detective. You don't go out and solve the crime. You determine what caused the person's death. You determine to the best you can of when and how and manner of death and so on. But insofar as determining, who did it, you don't go out and interrogate people. You are not a homicide detective. And it's clear that forensic pathologists and other forensic scientists should be impartial. They are not an arm of the prosecution. That was made abundantly clear by the National Academy of Sciences in a report they issued in February of 2009, February 2009, National Academy of Science report strongly stated that forensic scientists, medical examiners, and other forensic scientists are not an arm of the prosecution. They should function in an independent fashion as scientists, and whatever the findings are, then that's the way it'll play out. I've been saying that for a long time. I was thrilled to death when I saw that report and read it, stating the things that I have been arguing for very, very strenuously. The problem is that many medical examiners, not because it's some malevolent conspiracy, but they work with cops. These are their friends. They become buddies, and they get the story from the cops.
Mm-hmm.
How does it fit as to when the husband might have done it? He's got an alibi for such and such a time, and if it was before such a time or after such a time, then he doesn't have an alibi. These are the kinds of things that subconsciously fall into your mind. And medical examiners, in my opinion, far too often have gone along. And a good example is covering up police-related deaths. Compression asphyxiation, like we see with what Derek Chauvin, the cop, did to George Floyd in Minneapolis, leaning on his neck, on his back, and two other cops, and so on. I dealt with compression asphyxiation cases many years before then, and other cases of police-related deaths. They're covered up. They're not pursued properly. Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Eric Garner selling individual cigarettes, and New York City winds up dead. Terrible crime, right? Michael Brown's crime was walking down the middle of the street, a teenage boy with a friend, and that was the only way the cop could handle it, was to wind up shooting him. And Freddie Gray, riding by on a bicycle, a cop didn't like the way he looked at him and pursued him and knocked him off the bike and wound up breaking his neck, and he died. Breonna Taylor, shot down there in Kentucky. Arbery in Georgia, running away, shot multiple times in the back by the cop. The offense was having stolen license plates, didn't commit any great felony. He was not a danger to anybody. Medical examiners have not been forthright and straight shooters in these matters. They, as they say, I'm not suggesting that they have sat down to make a policy of this, but that's the way it works out, and that's why I have met with much success in cases over the years, not because of brilliance, but because there was bias on the part of the forensic pathologist, and I showed that through my testimony.
But the thing is,
so are you going to wrap it up? I'm puzzled you don't have any. Do you have listeners? Is anybody listening?
Yeah,
to us,
I've got about 50 listeners right now. So we're cool. It's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good. I'm really fascinated by this. Like I said, I did work a crime beat, and this just completely interests me.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I'm going to have to wrap it up now. You see, it's about 10:30.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you having invited me. And I hope that you get some good response from your listeners for the discussion.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I really do, and I thank you.
You haven't mentioned my book, by the way.
I was going to have you do that. See, right at the end. So here we are.
Is the life and deaths of Cyril Wecht, America's most controversial forensic pathologist. That's what led to this interview. A book has been published. It's available in Barnes & Noble and other bookstores. Life and Deaths of Cyril Wecht, Memoirs of America's Most Controversial Forensic Pathologist. I hope people will get the book, read about many of these cases, and about the criminal justice system. A lot of the things that I've dealt with over the years, they will find very interesting, extremely fascinating. That
sounds great. And where can they get this book?
I would say in any bookstore and from Amazon. And bookstores, Barnes & Noble and other bookstores. That's where they can get the book. And it'll be where people have really found it fascinating, extremely interesting and enjoyable, and discussions about many of my cases, as well as a lot of other things of great interest in the criminal justice system.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, sir, for taking the time.
Okay.
You have a good evening.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
All right, that was Cyril. And I have some stories to share with you guys before we do this. Let me remove all this. There we go. Get the right buttons going. I can tell you from experience, I was a crime beat reporter for 6 years in Yolo County. And I was very, very close with the county coroner. And it was a woman that ran the coroner's office in Yolo County. And I got the opportunity 2 or 3 times to go down to the coroner's office. And I can tell you, these guys have a real weird sense of humor. My father used to tell me when he was working for the post office that one of his people to talk to was the county coroner here in Sacramento, and they used to get a kick out of taking my dad into where the bodies were and the smell sometimes because they just pull somebody out of the river and my dad could smell it. And they thought it was really funny to take him over there and slide the thing open so he could see whoever it was. Yolo County was almost the same way. I never saw any bodies because they were real funny about it. But the humor of it all was that I go in there and I don't know what I was expecting, and she was real bubbly, and the photographer and I are going through, and she goes, well, sorry, the first time I went in, sorry, we have no bodies today, but we have other things to show you. And she was really excited. I mean, to hear her voice, it was like talking with a Mouseketeer, literally. And so she takes me over to this closet in where the storage part is, because they didn't have a lot of space there. I don't know if they moved and expanded, but they didn't have a lot of space there. Maybe they could get at the most 4 or 5 bodies in there if there was an issue. I think Sacramento was an overflow for them, or even Solano County. But I remember she took me to this closet, and there were these I don't know, bags that were like up on the wall of this closet, stacked on shelving. And she says, well, what do you think those are? And I said, well, I don't know. Well, walk in there and look. Just walk in there. Don't touch anything, but walk in and look. So I go, then I start walking in there, and she goes, you still don't have any idea, do you? And I said, no. She says, well, those are heads. If you lift those things up, those are heads. And I said, what do you mean they're heads? She says, well, we don't have room to store bodies. So when we get a John Doe, we keep the heads. Wow. And she says, now down there, and this is really sad, she says, but if we have any babies that are John Does or anything like that, that's where we keep the babies. It's down lower down there. So that was real sad, and you're trying to keep a straight face and be professional when you're talking to her, because, they're serious, but what they're going for is sometimes the off factor, because you're a reporter and you're young, and they want to see if they can bring that off factor out. So I said, fine. I said, okay. So I'm writing all this down. The photographer, I'm like, you can't get photos of this. Just pictures of the door. We go into where the entrance area is. There's a little area in there where they come in and they can bring students through there. College students or whatever, high school students, to show them what the coroner's office is like. And they've got stuff that's I can't say this word. I can never say formaldehyde. I can never say the word. I probably didn't say it right this time. And they have a bunch of jars, for teaching aids. And she comes bouncing over in a little Mickey Mouse way. And she puts this jar in front of me, and it's got this thing in there about this tall, kind of curved. And she says, what do you think this is? And the photographer and I are looking at each other, and we're like, oh, I don't know what the hell this thing is. So I said, well, it looks like a spine to me. And she says, no, it's a throat. And she was, looking me straight in the eye. And I said, a throat? She says, yeah. Now, what do you think that is? And she pointed at something inside the throat. And I said, I don't know. And she looked at me, she says, that's a steak fajita. And I went, wow, okay. And then she looked at me and said, the story on this one, we used it for training people. And the story on this is that he was an alcoholic, and he came home at 4 a.m. and he demanded dinner from his wife. So she made them the steak fajita. And she went to bed, and the next morning she found him hunched over on the table. And so they did the autopsy, and they have this throat thing with this big piece of, steak fajita in there that they keep for training. Second time I go to the office, I'm a little more relaxed, right? I do Halloween stuff all the time. I'm making bodies in my house. You can ask my family. It's all good. I got dead bodies everywhere. Come September, it's all full of bodies. I get in there and she says, well, we have bodies this time. She says, are you scared? I said, well, no. I'm doing weird stuff all the time at home. She takes me into the freezer, and I'm looking at the bodies, and I'm thinking, well, okay, I'm good as long as nobody moves or anything like that. I'm fine. And she went to show me something else, and I don't want to say it was disrespect. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but she shoved the bodies out of the way. Literally shoved them out of the way. Like, oh, well, they're in my way. Not like you would through a crowd, when you're trying to get through a crowd. She's shoving the bodies out of the way. And so I thought, okay, that's fine. And then the legs were kind of shaking. And I just thought, okay, I'm good. I saw the bodies. I can get out of here. So she shows me the examination room. This is where we do our fingerprints. This is where we do this. And they even had an evidence room, which was interesting because they had it was, a lot of the cases that I had covered as a reporter, there were bags, another area where there was a big long shelf area where they kept some evidence from different cases. And so, she says, oh, this is from so-and-so's case. This is from so-and-so's case. This is from so-and-so's case. And I said, cool. That's one I covered. She says, yeah, I know. That's why I'm showing you this stuff. This came off of so-and-so was wearing this. And, because we're keeping it in evidence because, there's still the trial still going on. And so I got to see all that stuff at the office. It really wasn't a scary place. It was like walking into a doctor's office or an operating room. But it was just interesting because the sense of humor that she had about it, about the whole thing. In fact, the third time I went to do another follow-up story, it was very popular stories I was writing, so they sent me out 3 times. She says, would you like a bag? And I thought, wow, a body bag. Yeah, we can get you a bag. And I'm thinking it's a full-size body bag. And again, go back to my Halloween. I'm thinking this would be really cool. I could cut holes in it for arms and legs, and put a face hole in there to zip myself up in this thing. And she comes out, she's got this bag. It never occurred to me what it was. She says, oh, no, this is a duffel. And it was probably about maybe 2 feet long, this bag, maybe 3. But it was a blue duffel bag. And it had it looked like a blue duffel bag. And it had a woven, handle on it that you could sling over your shoulder. I take the bag, and I'm like, okay, this is cool. I go back to the office, and they're kind of looking at me really funny. And pack up for the night, go home, and I get home, and my mother looks at me, and she says, get it out. And I said, what do you mean get it out? She says, look at the size on that bag. That's for a child. That's a body bag for a child. Now, whether it was or isn't, I don't know. Somewhere in this house is this thing that is about the same size as a child, and it's a blue duffel bag that probably is a body bag because it did zip up on the top. So that's pretty, that's my experience doing this stuff, going out, to talk to the coroners and whatnot, just like with him talking about going out to murder scenes and stuff. I've been out to murder scenes, but as a reporter, unless you know somebody, you don't get close to the murder scene. You're always on the outskirts of these murder scenes. Just like one rule I always had, as I got older, as you get older, you get wiser, because when you're first working, when there's an accident or when something happens, you want to run out and get on scene right away. But then you start to realize that there's not going to be anybody available. There won't be any PIO people to talk to for 35 or 40 minutes, maybe even a couple hours. So really, getting out there and rushing out to the scenes is pointless, because you're just going to stand there. Maybe you'll get some side photos or something. Maybe you can interview some people that are around there, but that's about the extent of it. That's all you're going to get. So there's no reason to go rushing out there. And since I lived in Sacramento and Woodlands, 25 miles away, rushing out there was pointless in the middle of the night. So I just pretty much wait till the mornings and make the phone calls when I got in. One that really sad for me was, I was the weekend editor, and Sunday nights I never could get off work on time. I was forever going to the movies at 11 p.m. midnight. I'd be rushing into movies for the last show for the night, Saturday and Sunday. This just because my schedule, I was putting the paper to bed, and then something would always, it never fails. You can sit there all day with nothing happening, and it's going to happen, boom, right at 5, right at your deadline, whether it's 5 or 7 o'clock or whatever, and you're going to be going out. And this particular night, I had 3 things happen at once. And the first thing that happened was that somebody had been at the county airport at Sacramento, and they had come off a plane, and they found some kind of dust on their luggage. Or they were going to get on a plane, and they found dust on these people's luggage. And so that was the time when they were when the authorities were having all those anthrax threats. So nobody wanted to take these people, and there was a abandoned restaurant in Woodland that said, okay, we'll take you in the parking lot. So I was just leaving work that day, getting done putting the paper to bed. Off I went. I went to this parking lot. I go out there. The guys were all in hazmat suits. In the meantime, they found a car in the river up near West Sacramento. And then as soon as I got done with that, with the hazmat story, I had to go up to West Sacramento and cover that. And that's kind of creepy because I went up there, and I've always had, like 300 millimeter, 1,000 millimeter lenses on my cameras. And I knew the highway patrolmen that were up there. They had already pulled the car out. And I get up there, and I'm taking photos, and I'm watching them, and it's still somewhat daylight because it's the summer. It's like August. And I focus in on this one photo, and I took my photo, and I'm looking through the zoom lens, and I don't see anything on in the seats of the car. It's all just mud, just pure mud. And I'm looking through the zoom lens, and as I'm looking through the zoom lens, I see the coroner go out there, and they grabbed whatever the top of this was and turned it towards me, and it was the guy's head. And that's when I realized the guy was still strapped. This person was still strapped. Woman, whatever, was still strapped in the car, and the head turned right towards me. And at that point, it was like something out of a horror movie because the crawdads, because this thing had been, later on, they determined that this thing had been in almost a year underwater. This guy had disappeared New Year's Eve. And here we were in August. And so it was like something out of a horror movie where there were crawfish crawling up. You could see the crawfish crawling up the torso, and when the mouth opened on the skull, this crawfish came crawling out. So it was like something out of a horror movie. So I get done with that one. Of course, the police thought it was rather humorous just to see my reaction when I saw the guy, because they knew what was going on the whole time. Okay, because again, the police have a sense of humor too. I get another call. I have to go back to Woodland because somebody was hit on a bicycle. And so I go back that night. Right now it's like 10 o'clock at night. So I go back to Woodland on this one. I think it was Beamer Street. And I go to the scene, and they've got those big highway lights up so they could light up the area. And I get out there, and it was a younger person that had been on this bike. And I see the bike's knocked over. What impressed me about the scene was that not only was the bike knocked over, but the tennis shoes were there from whoever this was. So the impact of the tomato truck that hit this kid had completely knocked him out of his shoes. And then drug him about 20, 30 feet. And the body was 20, 30 feet away. But the shoes were about maybe 8 feet beyond where the bike was. So I've seen that. One more that comes to mind that I'll share before I close off is I was driving to work, got all the way to work, and the call came out. It was a real hot day. Because I used to work an 11 to 8 shift, 11 to 11, whenever I get off. And it was an extremely hot day. In fact, you've got to remember that if it's 110 outside in Sacramento, if you have to get on the freeway and do any kind of walking out there, it's gonna be like 130, 140 degrees on the freeway. I mean, it's just going to be horrible. So I no sooner got to work, and the scanner goes off, and a car had been involved in a near collision with a semi. So I go driving back there, got my camera, and of course the PIO was not ready yet, but because the boss was there, I had to go. Otherwise I would have waited to go over there. So I get out there, and I get to drive down the safety lane because I'm a reporter. Although the traffic stopped, I get to drive down the safety lane. Get to where I'm supposed to be, walk in about maybe half a mile to the scene because it was blocked off. And there's the car, and there's a police line, do not cross there, and we're all standing there, all the reporters and whatnot. And they've got the window of the car covered up. And the car is not more than probably 10 feet away, maybe 15 feet, and we're all standing there. And I'm not cutting other reporters from different areas, but the Sacramento people the Sacramento and the people I was with, they're very respectful when they get the scenes that way. But we don't know who did this, but at some point somebody had taken the tarp that was over the side of the car off. And we were all standing there looking at this poor woman who was hunched over the steering wheel, and she was really in an odd position where she had, literally almost wrapped around the steering wheel. Okay. And this, by the way, this also involved 2 children. I think one died and then the other one survived. So anyway, we're staring at her for maybe about 30 minutes before anybody, because the police were so busy, doing their measuring and their forensic stuff, and the coroner hadn't gotten there yet. We had been staring at her, and her eyes were open still, obviously, for like 30 minutes before they came over and covered her up. But it turns out it was some reporter from another agency that took that tarp off. We to this day, I don't know who it was, but they took it off. Why they would do that. I get back to Woodland, and the case ended up being that this truck had cut her off, and she had turned into the grass part of the freeway to get away from the truck. The problem is, when the grass is dry, and this is something to remember when you're out driving, when the grass is dry like that, it's like ice. It's slick. There's no traction. So she lost control of the car, and that's what happened, and she got hit from the other side. And like I said, and it turns out she was the wife of, I think, the city manager. When I got back to Woodland, she was the wife of the city manager, and the 2 kids in were her nieces. And I think one passed away, and then the other one survived in the case. But that's the stuff you run into, as a crime reporter. And it's strange because that section of I-5 between Woodland and, I'm not going to say Yuba City, but Woodland and, oh my God, what's that other town? Arbuckle. I think it's Arbuckle. Zamora and Arbuckle. I call that Blood Alley. Because in the time I was there in 6 years, I had seen so many accidents, so many horrible accidents. Truckers who had been driving had to hit the brakes. The guy didn't have a seatbelt on. He flew through the windshield, and when you get out there, you could see where he bounced on the freeway. A lot of rollovers, a lot of jaws of life cases, a lot of stuff like that. I mean, there have been multiple out there. So, I mean, that's why I call it Blood Alley. I don't, maybe because I'm in Sacramento now, I don't hear a lot about them anymore. But when I was working back then, there were a lot. I mean, I was probably out there maybe once or twice a month when I was working. But anyway, that's enough of that. I just want to share it. I wanted to bring him on, Dr. Cyril. He's a tough customer, but I respect him. I respect him for what he does. And I'm glad you guys were here to watch it with me. As you could tell from the last time I did a phone interview, I made adjustments with the system, and I was able to get that so everybody could hear. But anyway, I'm glad you're here. Wednesday, we're finally going to get to talk to our friend Larry Jorgensen from Coca-Cola Company, and we can learn a lot about, we're kind of changing the pace on this. We're going to learn a lot about Coca-Cola come Wednesday. But again, I'm glad you guys came. I am Charlotte. I am the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, Northern California, Southern California, Central California, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, and we're starting to get some people back east as well. But I thank you guys for coming, and if you could share this show with at least 5 people, I would really appreciate it. We're trying to get our viewership up. And as you see, I have a ticker running along the bottom, and on this ticker, it's asking for donations, because in order to do these shows, and in order to ghost hunt, you guys are welcome. And in order to ghost hunt, we are a nonprofit. So that means everything comes out of pocket for us. So we work off donations. So if you could feel it in your heart to donate either to the team so we can upgrade our equipment and have equipment and stuff, or donate towards the show, that would be great. Doesn't have to be a lot, maybe $4 or $5 or something like that. The PayPal address is down there. I'd really appreciate it.
And again, please do share this with your friends. And if you liked it, if you didn't like it, share it with your enemies. That way, you can get, the more the merrier. Because like I said, we're trying to build up our audience, and slowly but surely we're doing that. But I want to thank you guys for coming tonight. And like I said, we are going to have the Coca-Cola guy coming in here, Larry Jorgensen himself. So thank you very much, and I hope you guys have a good couple days.